What we're seeing today is a perfect example of how the government is focused on the wrong things, while Conservatives are putting forward tangible and practical measures that will lower costs, bring interest rates down, get homes built around the country, put dangerous criminals behind bars. This Liberal government is focused on the standing orders of the House of Commons. While Canadians are going to food banks in record numbers, while people who have moved away from home, gotten jobs, find themselves renewing their mortgages, and then are being forced to move back in with their parents, while communities once safe and secure, where people would go to bed at night without locking their doors, are now investing in security cameras and other measures because their neighborhoods have gotten so dangerous. While all of this is going on in Canada, while this Prime Minister continues to break so many aspects of Canadian society, the Liberals come in with a programming motion, with using a valuable day of House time debating on how bills are going to be debated and how many hours this House will sit. While Conservatives will continue to raise the important issues that Canadians are facing, while Liberals want to debate and delay and have a day or two long debate arguing about how the process should be handled in the House of Commons. We're not going to let them off the hook, Mr. Speaker. Let's go through these points one by one. The government is saying that they have to do this to get their agenda through. We, in the official opposition, would happily help advance an agenda that actually accomplished these priority items. If they were to bring in a bill to cancel the carbon tax, or at least cancel the increase that they have scheduled for April 1st, we would support that. If they brought in tangible measures that would actually get homes built, we would support that. We found out just a couple of weeks ago, Mr. Speaker, that the housing minister, the current housing minister, who launched a brutal and devastating personal attack on the previous immigration minister. By the way, those are the same people. The former immigration minister is now the current housing minister. The current housing minister attacked the former immigration minister himself, blaming himself for so mismanaging the immigration system in this country that it's caused terrible consequences on the housing side of things, as this country now, after 8 years of this Prime Minister, builds fewer homes than new Canadians are added every year. He actually admitted that all their billions of dollars and their fancy photo ops and their repackaged announcement don't actually build specific homes. He admitted that at a committee. We asked him how many homes his vaunted and much celebrated in Liberal circles Housing Accelerator Fund. Boy, that sounds active, doesn't it? That's one of those buzzwords. I wonder how many consultants they had to hire to come up with a name like that the Housing Accelerator Fund. We wanted to know, okay, well, that sounds exciting. It sounds like that's going to really pick up the pace of home building in this country. So, simple question, how many homes is this Housing Accelerator actually built? And he said, it doesn't actually build any homes. Well, you'll pardon the official opposition, Mr. Speaker, if we come to this place to defend taxpayers' dollars, if we oppose billions of dollars of spending that doesn't actually build new homes. One of my Conservative colleagues asked a very simple question to the government when it comes to the carbon tax. How many greenhouse gases are actually reduced? Can the government tell Canadians how much the carbon tax lowers greenhouse gas emissions? I believe that was my colleague from Dauphin Swan River asked that very simple question. You would think that if the signature economic policy of this government is the carbon tax, that they might measure that. They might actually count how many greenhouse gas emissions are reduced by their signature policy. The answer came back, they don't keep track of it. They don't know. They don't measure that. They impose this carbon tax on Canadians. They're hiking it year after year, after promising not to, by the way. Remember that promise going into the 2019 election when the former Liberal Environment Minister, Catherine McKenna, promised, saying, no, they're never going to raise the carbon tax. The Liberals actually attacked me for telling Canadians not to believe them, and that once the election was over, when the Prime Minister didn't need Canadians' votes, but he still needed their money, that he would absolutely raise the carbon tax. I remember Catherine McKenna's other famous quote was, if you just repeat a lie louder over and over again, eventually people will believe you. That certainly bears out in how they've communicated around the carbon tax. They promised not to raise it, and now they're forcing through a hike year after year. They promised in the fiscal update of the fall of 2022 that they would stop pouring inflationary fuel on the fire. The current Liberal finance minister said that in order to fight inflation, they had to get a grip on government spending. And there's just that glimmer of hope, Mr. Speaker, that after telling Canadians that he doesn't think about monetary policy, in the few days after that fall economic update from 2022, there's that brief moment of hope where Conservatives thought, okay, maybe he finally gets it. Maybe someone finally read that part of macroeconomics textbooks to the Prime Minister and maybe explained to him how when governments go deep into deficits and force central banks to create brand new money out of thin air to bankroll government spending, that is what causes inflation. And that maybe he finally got that, and that they would work towards getting back to balanced budgets. Of course, that hope was very short-lived, as just a few weeks after that, they went right back to their Liberal ways, borrowing and spending, plunging this country deeper into deficit, and immediately afterwards, inflation started going up again. And that's why so many Canadians are cringing every time their interest rates go up. Because, of course, the Bank of Canada has to raise interest rates to fight the inflation that it caused in the first place by bankrolling the government deficit spending. And we want to stop the crime, Mr. Speaker. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, Canadians are less safe. In fact, many areas in Canada are experiencing a dramatic spike in violent crime that we haven't seen in decades, hitting all-time highs in many areas and for many different types of crime. Now, crime, like inflation, doesn't just happen. It's not like the weather. It's not like you can read the Farmer's Almanac one year and say, okay, well, we're probably going to have an early frost and inflation might hit 3.5%. Nope. Inflation and crime are directly linked to this government's policy decisions. During the previous Conservative government, we brought in tougher penalties for dangerous and repeat offenders. We're not talking about your young person making a mistake for the first time in their lives. We're talking about hardened criminals, people who use dangerous weapons to commit their crimes, people who commit the same crime over and over again, or people who cause grave bodily harm or even death in the commission of their crimes. We toughen those penalties. What did this Liberal government do? What did this Liberal Prime Minister do early on in his mandate? He started repealing those common sense Conservative tough on crime bills, and he made bail much easier to get. So it used to be in this country, if you had prior convictions, if you had proven to society and the courts that you were a dangerous offender, that if you're accused of committing a new crime, it would be harder to get bail. In other words, harder to be released before your trial. This Prime Minister, his ideological obsession with putting the rights of criminals ahead of the rights of law-abiding Canadians, decided to make bail easier to get. He actually mandated judges to err on the side of granting bail, even for those dangerous and repeat offenders. And again, we're not talking about a young offender picked up for the first time for shoplifting, or someone who's lost their temper for the first time and maybe lashed out at someone in a restaurant or in a park. We're talking about people who commit the same crime over and over and over again. And this government decided to put them back on the streets as early as possible. Well, no surprise, Mr. Speaker, crime started ticking up, and now we are in the midst of a crime wave that we haven't seen in over a generation. And it's all directly linked to this government's agenda. Now, Conservatives offer practical solutions. We offer many different ways of providing Canadians tax relief when it comes to the carbon tax. Obviously, we would like the government to acknowledge the failure of their signature economic policy. It does nothing to reduce emissions. They don't even count how many emissions are affected by the carbon tax. It increases the cost of literally everything. Everything that needs to be produced or shipped or refrigerated or heated or sold in a store that has to have lights or any type of those refrigerators or freezers, all have to pay the carbon tax. And that is built into the price that consumers pay at the price. Now, you're going to hear from Liberals throughout the day, and you've sat in that chair over the past few months, Mr. Speaker, you hear it all the time. Liberals will say things like, well, Canadians are better off with it because of this rebate that they've cooked up. What they don't tell Canadians is that their own appointed parliamentary budget officer, the budget watchdog, the person that this government appointed to scour through all the data, to go off into the room and read all the reports and measure everything and account for everything and model everything. The parliamentary budget officer, the nonpartisan, independent parliamentary budget officer, has concluded that the vast majority of Canadians pay far more in the carbon tax than they hope to get back in any rebate. The reason for that is because when they designed it, they deliberately excluded the knock-on effects of the carbon tax. So the only thing the rebate even contemplates when it's being calculated is the actual line item that you might see on your bill when you fuel up or when you pay your utility. But what you don't see, and what the calculation does not take into account, is all the price increases that go from farm to plate, from forest to Home Depot, all the aspects of the supply chain where costs are added on. The carbon tax applies every single step of the way and increases that price. So we offered a common sense plan to scrap the tax. They rejected that. So then we proposed, well, at the very least, stop hiking it. In the middle of a cost of living crisis, stop raising the carbon tax. When you're in a hole, you stop digging. Homer Simpson has the idea that when you're in a hole, you can try to dig up, but that doesn't work, Mr. Speaker. And it certainly doesn't work to keep digging, to add on those costs. They are hiking the carbon tax. It's due to go up again on April 1st by 23%. The media reports say that the rebate is only going to go up 17%. So even the fact that the rebate doesn't cover all the costs, not only that, but as they hike the carbon tax, the rebate doesn't keep up with it. So Canadians are falling further and further behind. We proposed, at the very least, stop hiking it. They rejected that. So then we said, okay, well, as grocery prices are going up, as that heartbreaking scene that so many of us see when we go to the grocery stores in our communities, you see well-dressed men and women, often with children, going through the grocery aisle, and they pick up a package of beef, and they stare at it for sometimes a full minute, maybe even a minute and a half. Maybe they pick up something else to compare it. And then they put both of them back because they can't afford it, because grocery prices have gone up so quickly, so dramatically because of the inflation and the carbon tax. And what's their answer? To keep hiking it. We proposed, let's at least take the carbon tax off of groceries and farmers. Let's remove the carbon tax off of farm production so that we don't tax the farmer who grows the food. We don't tax the the trucker who trucks the food, or the retailer who sells the food. They rejected that too. They don't want the carbon tax to be lifted off our agricultural producers. That's a tangible, practical way that we could bring costs down. They rejected that. We've proposed a common sense approach to tackle car thefts. Our leader announced a signature policy to deal with this scourge that is now plaguing Canadians from coast to coast. It's becoming one of Canada's fastest growing exports, stolen cars. After this Liberal government weakened penalties